When I packed the last of my things into the borrowed minivan, I told myself it was just a chapter, not the final page. The rent on my little garden flat had jumped so high I felt like I was being evicted by the future itself, and though I'd never wanted to rely on anyone, I found myself calling Daniel with shaking hands and an even shakier voice. "Just for a little while," I'd said, as if preemptively apologizing for my existence. "Of course, Mom," he replied, and something in his tone made me want to believe it would be okay. When I arrived at their house, Morgan greeted me with a smile too wide, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, and Daniel gave my shoulders a squeeze before returning to his laptop. They'd cleared out the guest room for me, if cleared out meant stacking storage bins in the corner and leaving a child's bedsheet on the twin mattress. Still, I was grateful. I folded my things neatly into drawers that still smelled faintly of cedar and silence, and tried to ignore how the door didn't fully close without a tug. That night, I offered to do dishes after dinner, and Morgan waved me off at first, then paused and said, "Actually, that'd be great. We're just swamped lately. It felt good to help. Useful." I scrubbed those plates like I was scrubbing away my guilt for needing them at all. Over the next few days, I took it upon myself to make things easier, sweeping the kitchen floor, folding laundry that had been left in the dryer, organizing their cluttered mail bin. No one asked, but no one objected either. Morgan started leaving little notes. "Can you pick up Jonah at daycare? Would you mind prepping dinner?" I told myself this was temporary, that it was a way to earn my keep. Daniel kept saying things like, "We're glad you're here, Mom," but always from another room, always while looking at a screen. At night, I lay in the narrow bed listening to the faint creaks of the house, the hum of the fridge, and the distant laughter from their bedroom. I reminded myself to be thankful. After all, what was the alternative? I'd rather be here than in a senior flat surrounded by antiseptic and bingo cards. Besides, helping out gave my days shape. I believed that. I needed to believe that. I told myself I was part of the family. Not a burden, not an intrusion. Just someone who loved them enough to fold their socks without being asked. But there was a small voice inside me, the one that had grown sharper since Harold died, that whispered late at night when the walls felt close and the warmth I once called mine belonged to someone else now. That voice said, "Watch carefully. Not every kindness is returned, and not every door, even one opened to you, stays that way." I tucked that thought beneath my pillow and slept lightly. It began slowly, the way mold creeps behind wallpaper or weeds push through cracks in concrete, unnoticed until they've swallowed the structure. What started as a few polite tasks, a dish here, a basket of laundry there, grew into a full-blown regimen, unspoken yet expected, as though the house had grown teeth and I had been volunteered to feed them. At first, I told myself I was being helpful, that staying busy kept the ache at bay, the ache that came from missing my old place, my garden, the routine Harold and I used to share before his heart betrayed him on a rainy Tuesday morning. But soon, I was rising before the sun to get Jonah dressed and fed so Morgan could scroll through her phone in peace. I prepped lunches in silence, reheated coffee that no one finished, and cleaned sticky fingerprints off every surface like a ghost trying to earn her keep. The to-do list was never written down, yet it unfurled endlessly in my mind. Grocery runs, pediatric appointments, organizing the garage so Daniel could find his golf clubs, picking up dry cleaning, wiping down baseboards. There were no thank yous, no nods of appreciation, just a growing assumption that I would be there. Hands ready, smile soft, like a permanent fixture, in a house that had once only promised me rest. Morgan started texting me reminders, though they were less reminders and more marching orders. "Can you make sure the roast is in by 3? Jonah has his speech appointment today. Don't forget his folder." Not once did she ask how I was. Not once did Daniel notice that my back was beginning to ache in the way only aging women understand. When I sat down with a book, the room shifted with quiet disapproval, as if I'd taken something that didn't belong to me time. I started to feel invisible, except when something needed doing. They didn't see me, not really. They saw what I could provide, the gaps I filled, the silence I made easier by keeping it. One afternoon, after rearranging the garage for the third time, I sat on the concrete floor and stared at a cardboard box labelled Christmas. It struck me then that I hadn't seen my own ornaments, the ones Harold and I collected through 42 years of marriage. I wondered if they'd been tossed, or simply buried beneath things more important to them now. I stayed there longer than I should have, staring at that box as though it might open and give me back some part of myself. I realized then that I was not staying with family. I was occupying the role of unpaid help with sentimental ties. The kind they assumed would never complain. The kind who stays quiet. But a seed was planted in that garage. Right next to the golf bag I dragged out for Daniel. A seed called self-worth. And once it starts growing, even silence can't stop it. It was during a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that sags heavy with chores and microwaved leftovers, when I first heard Morgan say it. I had just finished sweeping the kitchen for the second time that day. Jonah had spilled pretzel crumbs again, and the dog tracked in dried mud, and I was wiping my hands on my apron when I caught her voice, rising in laughter from the back patio. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but our lives were close now, the walls thin, and the privacy thinner. "Oh, it's great," she giggled into her phone. "We've basically got a live-in maid who works for hugs." My breath caught somewhere between a swallow and a sigh. I stood frozen with my hand still on the broom, the words wrapping around my ribs like vines, slow and choking. I waited for her to say she was joking, to soften it, to add a, "just kidding," but it didn't come. Just more laughter, more easy chatter. I backed away from the door like it had bitten me. Later that evening, Daniel said it too, in a quieter, more calculated tone. We were unloading groceries, me moving through the kitchen on autopilot, and he leaned against the counter with a smirk that reminded me of him at 15, when he thought sarcasm made him clever. "You know, most people your age would kill to live somewhere rent-free," he said, like he was offering me some revelation I should be grateful for. I kept my face smooth and my movements calm, setting cans on the shelf like they hadn't just buried my pride. I smiled, as one does when biting through leather, and said, "Yes, I suppose I'm lucky." But something twisted in my stomach then, a slow, coiling heat that made me see everything differently. The house I thought of as sanctuary now looked like a trap. The daily tasks I performed out of love began to feel like currency. They didn't see me as their mother, as the woman who held Daniel's fevered body through chickenpox, or who sewed Morgan's wedding veil with trembling fingers the week after Harold passed. No, now I was, "Can you just," personified. "Can you just fold this? Can you just grab that? Can you just keep him for a few more hours?" Like my name had been scrubbed from memory and replaced with obligation. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, the sheets neatly tucked in by my own hands, and stared at the closed door like it could answer something. My stomach still knotted, not with hunger but humiliation. I realized then that the gratitude they expected from me came at the price of being invisible. And the worst part was, they didn't even know they'd crossed a line. Because to them, there was never a line to begin with. I was part of the furniture now. But furniture has weight. And one day, when it's gone, the absence is louder than they ever imagined. It was a windy Thursday when I arrived at Jonah's preschool, the kind of afternoon where the clouds hang low and fast like they're in a hurry to be somewhere else. I had just come from the store, groceries still rolling around in the trunk, when I parked outside the cheerful little school with its pastel murals and handprint art taped to every window. I walked in like I always did, smiling at the receptionist and waving at the little boy behind the desk who always had a sticker stuck to his forehead. But today, instead of the usual nod and buzz of the door, I was stopped politely but firmly. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, eyebrows pulling together like a drawstring. "But you're not on the authorized pickup list for Jonah Carter." I blinked at her, certain I'd misheard. "I'm his grandmother," I said, pointing toward the gate where I could already hear the bubbling sounds of laughter and sneakers skimming gravel. "I've picked him up all week." She gave me a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes and stood to fetch the director, who emerged moments later, hands clasped, her tone calm but rehearsed. "We really need documentation," she said. "Until then, we can't release him to you again without a direct call from a parent." I stood there, humiliated, my palms slick and hot despite the chill in the air, and assured them it wouldn't happen again. I walked out without Jonah. Had to call Morgan, who sounded irritated as if I had interrupted her day rather than flagged a mistake. "Oh," she said, with a laugh too airy to be sincere. "I guess Daniel forgot to add you. No apology, no urgency, just a dismissive, almost bored kind of indifference." When they got home, I brought it up again, gently. I said I'd been embarrassed, that it would have helped to be informed. Daniel waved a hand like he was swatting away a fly. "You know how busy we've been," he said, stretching out on the couch like he was the one who'd spent the afternoon standing outside a gate like an uninvited guest. Morgan didn't look up from her phone. "We'll fix it," she mumbled, and then just moved on. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, watching it spin its slow, hypnotic circles, and wondering when I became someone who needed to ask permission to pick up her own grandson. The house felt colder somehow, the walls farther apart, and my heart like it had slipped just a little out of rhythm. It wasn't the omission that hurt the most, it was the lack of care, the ease with which they brushed it off, like my presence was a background detail in a painting of their lives. That was when I began to understand that being needed wasn't the same as being valued, and no matter how many tasks I took on, I would never truly belong in a place that saw me as an afterthought. The smell of vanilla and sugar still clung to my sleeves as I stood in the corner of the backyard, watching toddlers in paper crowns chase each other with bubble wands. I had spent the better part of 2 days perfecting those cupcakes, 48 of them, in soft pastels and tiny edible stars, each piped with the kind of precision I hadn't used since my own Daniel was little enough to believe in magic. I was proud of them, not because anyone told me to be, but because I had made something beautiful with my own 2 hands, something sweet and soft to mark a milestone in a boy's life who called me Mimi with sticky fingers and half-formed words. I didn't expect a medal, but I suppose I thought there would at least be a thank you. Instead, I watched Morgan hold court by the table, smiling graciously as guests complimented the spread. "You really outdid yourself," one mother said, biting into a lavender-frosted swirl. Morgan gave a tight-lipped smile and simply said, "Thank you." I felt it like a pinprick behind my ribs. Not a word about me, not a glance. I stood there in my best cardigan, holding a paper plate and a half-warm cup of lemonade, feeling invisible in a space I had helped create. Then came the moment that truly caught me off guard. A neighbor I hadn't met before leaned over and asked, cheerful and clueless, "Are you the nanny?" I laughed, reflexively, assuming she was joking, but she wasn't. She pointed at the way I was gathering napkins, tidying the drink station, gently keeping the children from tugging at the tablecloth. "You're so good with them," she added. I turned toward Morgan, who was standing close enough to hear, and waited for her to interject, to laugh, to say, "Oh no, that's my mother-in-law. She lives with us." But she didn't. She just sipped her rosé and looked away, like the question didn't concern her at all. I smiled at the woman and said nothing, too tired to explain who I was to people who didn't care to know. That night, after the balloons sagged and the paper crowns crumpled, I stood alone in the kitchen rinsing frosting out of bowls while Daniel scrolled through pictures on his phone saying, "The party went great." Huh? I nodded, because I was too worn down to say what I really wanted to. That it hadn't been great. That it had been painful. That there's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from standing in the middle of a celebration you helped build and realizing no one even sees you. I looked at the photos later, Jonah smiling, Morgan beaming, Daniel raising a toast. Not one picture of me. As if I had floated through the day like a shadow. Useful, but unnamed. And for the first time, I began to wonder what would happen if I stopped showing up at all. I came back from the grocery store that day with bruised bananas and sore knees, but what I walked into hurt more than either. The house was oddly quiet, except for the faint sound of drawers opening and closing upstairs. At first, I thought maybe Morgan was just looking for something, an extra blanket perhaps, or that steamer she never puts back in the same place twice. But as I climbed the stairs, each step seemed to echo with something colder than usual. When I reached the doorway of what they still called my room, I froze. There was Morgan, crouched on the floor, her back to me, pulling out the bottom drawer of my dresser. Clothes were stacked in messy piles on the bed, and boxes lined the wall. My photo albums, the ones I kept neatly on the shelf beneath the window, were in a cardboard box labelled in thick black marker. Misc. Just that. Miscellaneous. Years of birthdays. Family vacations. Baby Daniel wrapped in towels after bath time. My wedding day. The day after Harold died, miscellaneous. I stood there without saying a word. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what would come out of my mouth if I did. When she finally noticed me, Morgan looked up with a breezy smile, as if nothing were out of place. "Oh, hi, Helen," she said, brushing her hands on her leggings. "I was just reorganizing in here. Thought I could make some space for Jonah's winter stuff. We're running out of room downstairs." As if my room, my one room, wasn't already shrinking with every unspoken expectation layered into the walls. I tried to steady my voice. "You didn't think to ask me first?" She waved it off. "It's just storage, nothing major. Your things are all safe." But they weren't safe. They were boxed, categorized, pushed aside to make room for their lives, their needs, their expansion into every corner of a house I was told would be mine too, for now. I picked up the album closest to the edge of the box. The spine had bent. A photo of Daniel as a boy peeked out, half-curled. I pressed it flat with my palm and felt something hot rise behind my eyes. Not rage exactly, but something older and heavier. I asked her to please leave it, to not touch anything else. She shrugged and said sure, but the damage was done. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like a guest in my own history. The air smelled faintly of cardboard. I wondered how long before the room itself would be repurposed entirely. A guest room, a home gym, an office, anything but mine. It's strange how quickly a space becomes unfamiliar, how fast your presence can be erased without a single cruel word. Just a box, just a label, just enough to make you feel like you're already halfway gone. It was never my intention to snoop. I was looking for the grocery list Morgan had typed out on her phone that morning, the one she asked me to pick up, since I was already out anyway. She'd left her phone charging on the kitchen counter, screen still lit, and when it buzzed again with a message preview, my eyes caught a glimpse before my sense of dignity could blink it away. At first, it didn't register. I thought maybe it was one of those off-color jokes people made without thinking, but I tapped the screen just once, and there it was, plain as the flower I had just bought. She better not die on us. She's doing daycare, laundry, and meal prep. It was sent to someone named Jess, followed by 3 laughing emojis. I stared at it so long the phone screen dimmed and locked itself, as if it too had gone quiet from shame. My heart didn't race. It didn't even ache. It just went numb. There's a stillness that comes when you realize you're not a person to someone, just a utility. Something convenient, replaceable. I stood there gripping the edge of the counter, trying to breathe through it, wondering how long they'd felt this way. Maybe from the beginning. Maybe the thank you that never came wasn't a forgetful moment but a pattern, a sign I was never seen as family but as function. I looked around the kitchen, the one I cleaned every morning and every night, where I prepped Morgan's almond milk smoothies and Daniel's late-night casseroles, and I felt like a ghost of myself. I had let them believe that I was happy to help, and maybe I had been in some small, foolish part of me that still craved usefulness. But I didn't sign up to be mocked. I didn't sign up to be some punchline in a private text thread. I left the groceries on the counter, not bothering to put away the milk or the bread, and walked out the back door into the small garden I'd helped plant the month I moved in. The rosemary was thriving. The lavender bush had doubled in size. I bent down and ran my fingers through the soil, grounding myself in something that didn't ask me for anything, didn't laugh at me behind my back, didn't see me as a burden or a convenience. I didn't cry. I just sat there until the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows softened around me. I went back inside when it was dark, said nothing, smiled when they asked what took me so long. But something had shifted. Something irreversible. That night, I didn't fold the laundry. I didn't prep lunches. I didn't set out tomorrow's vitamins. I simply climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, the words from that message looping through my head like static. I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors. But in that silence, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be part of their joke anymore. I didn't scream, didn't pack my bags, didn't slam drawers like some daytime soap wife who's finally had enough. I did what women like me have always done when dignity has been scraped too thin to yell. We retreat into silence, but not passivity. Silence has texture when you know how to use it. The next morning, I slipped on my sensible shoes and told Morgan I had an errand downtown. She didn't look up from her laptop, just waved her coffee cup vaguely and said, "Grab more eggs." I didn't respond. I walked out the door, not to the market, but to a quiet corner cafe 3 blocks from the courthouse, where I knew Marion, an old friend and a semi-retired lawyer, held her morning office hours for people like me. Marion had once helped me settle Harold's estate. She wore her wisdom like a scarf, loosely and without apology. When I walked in and she looked up, her eyes softened before I even sat down. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I told her the basics, that I was living with Daniel and Morgan temporarily, that things had become difficult, that I had a hunch I might need some backup soon. She nodded through each word, her pen already moving across a yellow legal pad. "Start documenting," she said. "Everything. What you pay for, what you do, what you're told." That night, while they watched their Netflix show and asked me to reheat leftovers, I smiled, nodded, and quietly retrieved the grocery receipts from the drawer where I'd always tucked them. They'd never paid me back for those shopping runs, never offered a cent when I called the plumber after the toilet flooded, never even noticed when I renewed the pest control subscription online using my credit card. It added up. I pulled out a binder I had used years ago to organize tax files and began to sort through everything. Gas mileage, babysitting dates, cleaning supplies. I even printed screenshots of Morgan's texts requesting last-minute errands, thinly veiled as favors, but stacked like unpaid invoices. No one noticed me doing it. No one asked why I'd been staying up later. Morgan just assumed I was watching game shows in my room, and Daniel barely looked up from his phone. I didn't mind. The quieter they were, the more invisible I became, the easier it was to prepare. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing the record. There is something satisfying about gathering proof not to throw in someone's face, but to finally name the unpaid weight you've been carrying like it's just part of aging. I wasn't just their free labor. I was their invisible backbone. And if the day came that I needed to reclaim my place, I would walk into that moment not with bitterness, but with facts. I had built their home life with my hands. They just hadn't realized those same hands were capable of signing something far more powerful than a grocery list. The pen felt heavier than it used to, though maybe that was just the weight of what I was about to sign. I sat across from Marion again, same cafe, same corner table, but this time with a folder in front of me full of revisions and a name that hadn't been there before. My fingers trembled just a bit as I uncapped the pen and hovered it above the signature line. Red ink. Not out of spite or dramatics, but because it was the only pen in my bag, tucked in with a lipstick and a grocery receipt from 3 weeks ago. Marion raised her brows when she saw it and smiled. Fitting, she said softly. They'll definitely notice this. I didn't smile back. I was too full of something quieter. Not anger, not sadness, just a kind of clarity that had taken its time to arrive. The documents were simple. My modest life, reduced to pages. The pension Harold had left me. The little cabin up north, with the broken chimney and the creaky floorboards. The tiny account we had built with careful, measured frugality, always thinking we'd need it someday. Well, someday had come, and I had decided that none of it would go to Daniel. Not to Morgan. Not to people who could sit across from me at dinner and ask for mashed potatoes while letting me wash every dish afterward without a thank you. Instead, I named my goddaughter, Noelle, a nurse in her early 30s who had once held my hand through a dizzy spell and stayed to clean my kitchen when I insisted she didn't have to. Noelle, who called every week like clockwork, who brought me soup when I had the flu last winter, who had no blood tie to me, but carried a deeper kinship than anyone in that house where I currently slept in a room filled with storage bins. I remembered how her eyes watered when I once complimented her mother's lasagna, and how she said, "You always say the kindest things." That was who would receive what I had left to give. Not because she needed it, but because she earned it in ways that couldn't be measured in chores or currency. I signed the line slowly, the red ink blooming across the paper like something alive. Marion slid it toward her with a soft nod and said, "It's done." And just like that, it was. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling strangely lighter, as if some invisible pack I'd been hauling for months had quietly slid off my shoulders. It wasn't about money. It was about meaning. About knowing that in the end, what I had built and saved wouldn't fall into the hands of people who only saw me as convenience. My legacy would not be scrubbed away by ingratitude. It would live on in someone who knew how to say thank you. And that, more than anything, made me feel rich again. I woke that morning with no cough, no fever, not even a hint of nausea, but I pulled the covers up to my chin and stayed in bed anyway. It wasn't rebellion. It was revelation. After months of moving like clockwork from laundry to lunches to lullabies, I wanted to see what the house would do if the gears stopped turning. So I turned off the alarm on my phone, ignored the calendar reminder to defrost chicken thighs, and didn't tiptoe to make coffee before anyone else stirred. I simply laid there, still, breathing quietly beneath the floral quilt I'd brought from my old place. By noon, I heard the first signs of strain. The dryer buzzing repeatedly, then beeping for what felt like an hour before someone finally shut it off. A child's wail from the next room. The slam of a cupboard door, followed by Morgan's voice rising in pitch, sharp with panic, muttering something about cereal being the only breakfast option because she forgot to go shopping. I didn't move. I didn't offer help. When Daniel came up and asked if I was okay, I told him I wasn't feeling great and thought I should stay in bed for a bit. His eyebrows drew together, concern wrestling with inconvenience, and he said, "Let us know if you need anything." But he didn't mean it. He meant, "Don't make this my problem." By the second day, takeout containers lined the counter. The toddler's hair was tangled, her clothes mismatched. A stench rose from the trash bin no one thought to empty. Daniel burned toast trying to multitask and left the iron on the kitchen table. Morgan posted online about how hard it was being a full-time working mum without backup, as though I had evaporated instead of just resting my knees. I lay there and listened to it all, the hum of a house unraveling thread by thread, and let it happen. It wasn't petty. It was proof. Proof that I hadn't been just helping or pitching in a little. I had been holding the entire rhythm of their lives together while they treated me like a well-behaved shadow. The third day, Daniel knocked again and asked if I'd be up to making a soup later because their daughter hadn't eaten a vegetable in 2 days. I smiled and said, "Not today, dear. Maybe tomorrow." He blinked, confused by the gentleness. I shut the door slowly. That evening, I heard them arguing downstairs about how long this could go on, and something inside me settled. It was working. The illusion had cracked. The free labor had caught the flu, and suddenly the machine didn't run. I didn't rejoice. I just breathed easier, knowing that now they would have to see what I had truly been. Not a guest, not a favor, not an old woman grateful for scraps, but a backbone. And without me moving, they would learn what it meant to stand on their own. The email came while I was folding yet another stack of towels, the cheap kind Morgan buys in bulk that lose their softness after 2 washes. I nearly missed it, tucked between sale alerts and the preschool newsletter. But the subject line caught me like a rope thrown from a life raft. "Welcome to the team." My heart stuttered. I'd applied to the part-time position at the local library weeks ago, on a whim, really, after chatting with the librarian who'd recognized me from my old neighborhood book club and said they were looking for someone with experience in community outreach. I hadn't told Daniel or Morgan, not because I was being secretive, but because I knew how they'd react with that strained smile people wear when they're trying to make your independence sound like an inconvenience. But there it was, in black and white. They wanted me. I started the next Monday, and for the first time in what felt like years, I walked into a space where people didn't see me as a burden or a ghost. They saw Helen. Miss Helen, actually, with a name tag and a voice in the room. The library smelled like stories and floor polish, and the morning sunlight through the tall windows felt like something holy. My co-workers greeted me with warmth and curiosity, asking about my favorite authors and whether I took cream in my coffee. I blinked when someone handed me a mug, without expecting a diaper changed in return. I sat in a circle of retirees and teenagers alike, recommending mystery novels, helping an elderly man scan a form, and shelving books with quiet joy. It was only 10 hours a week, but those 10 hours gave me breath. When I came home, I didn't rush to the sink. I didn't offer to make dinner. I sat at the table with my book still in hand and let them ask where I'd been. Morgan raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the job. "Oh," she said. "Will you still have time for everything else?" I smiled. "I think I'll be reprioritizing," I said gently. Daniel looked like he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. I walked upstairs, head high, and for the first time in that house, I felt like I wasn't just occupying space, I was reclaiming it. In the quiet of my room, I placed my name tag beside the photo of my late husband and whispered, "Did you see that, Harold?" I imagined him grinning. The library had given me more than a job. It had given me back the sound of my own name spoken with respect. It had reminded me that I was not invisible, not past usefulness, not some silent cog in their machine. I was Helen, reader of poems, lover of quiet corners, bearer of stories. And somewhere between the stacks and the circulation desk, I had started to remember who I had always been, long before someone decided I was only useful if I stayed quiet and cleaned. I didn't make a scene. I didn't slam drawers or demand attention or rattle off a list of everything I'd done for them like a martyr keeping score. I simply folded my sweaters with care, laid my shoes side by side in the bottom of the suitcase, and zipped it shut with the quiet satisfaction of someone who finally remembered she had a choice. The note I left on Daniel's nightstand wasn't angry. It was short, typed in the same font I used when I made birthday cards in Publisher years ago. And it said only this: "Thank you for housing me. I found somewhere that feels more like home." That was the truth. The very next morning, I would be signing a month-to-month lease on a sunny upstairs room in Miss Adele's house, a widow like me, whose kitchen always smells like cinnamon, and who greets her mailman by name. She didn't want a tenant to clean her gutters or raise her grandchildren. She just wanted company, someone to split groceries with, and watch documentaries on Tuesdays. I hadn't told Daniel and Morgan a thing. There had been no conversation, no plea for understanding, no bargaining. Because I already knew how it would go. Morgan would twist her face in that brittle smile and say, "Why didn't you talk to us first?" As if I hadn't spent a year talking only to be ignored. Daniel might frown and offer a limp hug, the kind you give out of obligation, not warmth. And I wasn't interested in either. As I wheeled my suitcase to the front door, the toddler, my sweet grandson, peeked around the corner in his dinosaur pajamas, thumb in mouth. I bent down and kissed his forehead. "Be good," I whispered. "And remember, Nana loves you." He didn't understand what was happening. Not really. But he hugged my neck, and that was enough. I didn't wake Daniel or Morgan. I didn't owe them a performance. Outside, the night air was cool and kind, and the taxi I'd quietly arranged days ago was waiting at the curb. The driver didn't ask questions. He just helped with the bag, smiled, and turned on the radio. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the house. I looked ahead, toward the porch light that would be on when I arrived, toward the room where no one would go through my drawers, toward mornings with coffee and conversation, not chore lists and cold silences. I had loved my son with the kind of love that makes you erase yourself just to be helpful. But love that is only taken and never returned isn't love at all, it's labor in disguise. I wasn't leaving in anger. I was leaving in peace. Because somewhere between the folded towels and unspoken jabs, I remembered I had earned my rest. And I would not apologize for finally claiming it. The morning after I left, I imagined the house was filled with the sound of rustling drawers being opened, fridge doors yanked, footsteps back and forth, as reality began to settle into the cracks I used to fill. I didn't leave with rage. I left with precision. Every surface I had once wiped down was left untouched, every dish from the night before still in the sink where they had placed it without a second thought. The coffee machine, which I used to prime before they even stumbled out of bed, sat dry and blinking. The laundry basket that used to magically empty itself remained full. Socks and baby onesies, cascading like an undone spell. And then, of course, the kitchen, empty of its usual hum. No scent of breakfast warming the air. No stack of clean Tupperware filled with lunches for the week. No hand-scribbled notes reminding Morgan to take her iron pills, or Daniel to call his dentist. Just a single sticky note on the fridge door, centered and steady the way I used to center birthday streamers or that paper turkey we always hung in November. It read, "Love is not a labor contract." That was all. No name signed, no heart drawn at the end. Because if they didn't recognize my handwriting by now, they never really saw me to begin with. I know Daniel must have stood there for a moment, keys in one hand, half-zipped backpack in the other, and just stared. Maybe Morgan was behind him, already scrolling through her phone for a takeout number because breakfast wasn't magically appearing. Maybe the toddler asked where Nana was, and no one had an answer that didn't taste sour. I wasn't there to witness their unraveling, but I didn't need to be. I had been the quiet glue for so long that my absence would echo louder than any tantrum. No one had to raise their voice to feel the emptiness I left behind. I had cooked with care, folded with intention, driven with love, and now all of that care, intention, and love was no longer theirs to exploit. Let them sit in it. Let them feel what happens when someone who gave everything decides she's had enough. Maybe they'd learn something. Maybe they wouldn't. That wasn't my burden anymore. I had done my part. I had given them the gift of my time, my energy, my grandmother's recipes, my stories, my patience. And when they mistook all of that as entitlement to more, I gave them the silence they earned. The house, I imagine, felt bigger now. Not because I took up space, but because I filled it with warmth they never bothered to appreciate until it vanished. And in that space, left between a cold stovetop and a blinking microwave, sat the truth they had refused to acknowledge. Love asks. Love thanks. Love respects. Anything else is just convenience in a borrowed apron. The first morning I woke up in the cabin, I didn't feel the usual weight pressing down on my chest, the invisible heaviness that came from being needed but never appreciated. Instead, I opened my eyes to the soft creak of pine and the hush of wind brushing against the window panes. The air smelled of dew and cedar, and the faint trace of lavender from the sachet tucked under my pillow. My goddaughter Marin had helped me repaint the walls 2 days prior, cheerful as ever, with paint flecks in her hair and kindness in every gesture. She was the kind of person who asked, not assumed. Who offered, not demanded. We had chosen a soft cream for the kitchen and a muted blue for the bedroom. The same colour my late Harold once joked, looked like the lake had climbed inside and decided to stay a while. I had spent the first few hours placing curtains. I picked myself linen ones, with a delicate rose pattern that reminded me of the tablecloth my mother used on Sundays. It was quiet, but not lonely. I brewed my own tea, poured it into a mug with chipped edges I refused to throw out, and sat on the front porch with a blanket over my knees. As birds darted from branch to branch like little punctuation marks in a sentence, I was finally writing for myself. No one barked orders. No toddler tantrums. No cold glances over morning coffee. Just the rhythm of the lake lapping against the dock and the tick of the wall clock Harold had fixed more times than I could count. Marin stopped by that afternoon with a basket of groceries and a blueberry pie she made herself. She didn't stay long, just enough to help screw in the new light fixture and ask if I needed anything else. I said no, and I meant it. Because for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't need to be needed to feel whole. I only needed to be seen. And here, even the trees seemed to look at me with a gentleness I hadn't known in Daniel's house. I unpacked slowly, one memory at a time. Photo albums found their home on the shelf beside my favourite novels. A hand-stitched quilt from my sister now graced the foot of the bed. I touched each item like it was a vow to myself. No one would box up my history again. This space was mine. Not borrowed. Not temporary. Not conditional. Mine. The peace here wasn't loud, but it was present. It didn't cheer when I walked into the room, but it waited patiently, like a loyal friend who knew the value of silence. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't have to earn rest. The curtains fluttered gently as I stood at the window that evening, watching the sun dip low over the lake. And I whispered into the dusk, "I'm home." The letter came on a Wednesday, folded too crisply, like it had been pressed between hope and strategy. The envelope was cream-coloured, thicker than usual, with my name in that tidy handwriting Morgan uses when she's trying to sound formal. I didn't open it right away. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea first, sat in the sunroom with the breeze teasing the edge of the curtain, and let the envelope sit on the side table while I watched a cardinal hop along the railing. When I finally opened it, the words inside were dressed in sugar but reeked of vinegar. "We hope you're doing well. And Daniel and I have been talking about how much we miss your presence around the house," it began, which was a lie soft as a thorn hidden in wool. The next paragraph bled into questions if I'd considered updating the family estate plan, if I might revisit some shared investments that could benefit everyone, if I would be open to a conversation about legacy. The gall of it made me laugh. The kind that starts low and slow and ends up tugging at your ribs. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I simply folded the letter back up, tucked it into the basket where I store unread junk mail, and let it disappear into the pile of things that no longer owned any part of me. Then I poured a second cup of tea and opened my notebook. The one I'd been filling with ideas ever since Marin suggested I start a small community grant. I titled this entry, "The New Beginning Fund," and I wrote underneath it, "For women who cooked the meals, folded the towels, picked up the kids, and were never paid in more than guilt." I picked up my checkbook, still warm from the sunbeam falling across the desk, and wrote the first donation in a deliberate hand. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to Morgan or Daniel. It was about reaching back to the woman I had been the one standing at their kitchen sink with her hands in dishwater and her name never spoken with gratitude, and letting her know she hadn't been erased. She had simply outgrown the room she was forced into. I sealed the envelope, stamped it with a sense of closure, and walked it to the mailbox myself. On the way back, Mabel from next door waved from her porch, and I thought how lovely it was that some people say hello without needing anything. The kettle whistled when I stepped back inside, and the air was filled with rosemary and sunlight and something else I hadn't felt in years. Freedom without apology. I was never just helping. I was holding everything together. And now, finally, I was holding something for myself.